خليفة حفتر اسم مثير للجدل في ليبيا، اسم ابن قبيلة الفرجاني المترامية عروقها إلى كبرى مدن البلاد. ظهر لأول مرة عام 69 إبان إنهاء حكم الملك إدريس السنوسي على أيدي مجموعة من الضباط. كان حفتر حينها إلى جانب الزعيم الليبي الراحل رجل القذافي. ثم عاد اسم الرجل للأضواء حين قاد التدخل الليبي في تشاد، وهناك أسر قبل أن تجليه قوات أمريكية.
Once a staunch supporter of Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi, he was cast aside during Libya's disastrous war with Chad in the 1980s, and Gaddafi abandoned Haftar and several hundred other Libyan soldiers who were held as prisoners of war. He set up a rebel brigade against the Gaddafi regime, but eventually sought asylum in the US, living a quiet suburban life in Virginia for the next 20 years, fueling speculation that he may have been involved with the CIA.
The CIA want to see a military commander they can trust, Colonel Khalifa Haftar.
The Americans want Haftar to go back to Libya, to join the fight, to professionalize the rebellion.
Once a senior leader in the Libyan army, taking on Gaddafi is personal. 254 people have died in the devastating terrorist bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over the Scottish town of Lockerbie. Like the earlier bombing of a Berlin disco and gun attacks on civilians in European airports, the Lockerbie attack carries all the hallmarks of an operation by unhinged Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi is deliberately and openly targeting Americans abroad. In the wake of a failed U.S. military operation to eliminate him, the CIA now turns to a new strategy. CIA Director William Casey plans to create a rebellion in Libya.
Already there have been efforts about putting together a paramilitary force of Libyans to try and have a little regime change in Libya.
For 7 years, Casey has been secretly supporting Libyan opposition groups in neighboring countries, providing weapons and training. In Washington, they are pinning their hopes on a revolution to overthrow the man they call the Mad Dog, led by Khalifa Haftar and his CIA-trained force of rebels. Then events in Africa ruin the CIA's plans. In 1990, the pro-American government of Libya's neighbor, Chad, is forced out and replaced by a new president who is hostile to the US-backed Libyan rebels.
So suddenly you have these several hundred Libyan soldiers sitting in Chad, getting ready to take action against Gaddafi, but the new president of Chad doesn't want them there. Ultimately, the Americans are left with no choice but to bring them back to the US.
The man the CIA want to lead a Libyan rebellion settles in suburban Virginia, only a short drive from CIA HQ in Langley. His men are settled across the country in 25 different states.
Haftar himself, after this long odyssey across Africa, settles in Falls Church, Virginia. He lived in a very nice house, he had a lot of kids, but he still always harbored this idea of returning to Libya.
A new opportunity for the CIA to deal with Gaddafi arises: the Arab Spring. Inspired by revolts in Tunisia and Egypt, popular protests break out across Libya.
In February of 2011, as the Arab Spring takes off, it finally percolates through, if you like, to Libya, and a protest in Benghazi gets out of hand and quickly becomes an uprising.
Gaddafi sends his troops against the protesters, believing no one will interfere.
Gaddafi probably in 2011 concluded that he was going to be okay, that the Americans would not move against him.
The CIA have always viewed Gaddafi as a clear and present danger to the U.S. Now, seizing the chance to remove him, the agency springs into action. It is time for Khalifa Haftar, the former commander of the anti-Gaddafi rebels, who has spent 20 years languishing in suburban America, to return to Libya. 1 month into the rebellion, Haftar arrives in Benghazi with a handful of his officers to cheering crowds. Within weeks, he is installed as the commander of the rebel forces.
The CIA needed trainers to help this ragtag army that was forming. That's what Khalifa Haftar was there to do, to help organize an otherwise completely disorganized rebellion.
With their preferred man in charge, the CIA is better placed to steer the Libyan rebellion.
Now follow me to March 26, 2011. The McClatchy newspapers reported, and I quote, "The new leader of Libya's opposition military left for Libya 2 weeks ago," unquote. Apparently, around the same time, the president signed the covert operations order, and I'm making that observation. The new leader spent the past 2 decades of his life in Libya? No. In suburban Virginia, where he had no visible means of support. His name, Colonel Khalifa Haftar. Now, one wonders when he planned his trip, and who is his travel agency?
ما كان يفترض أن تقره الحكومة المرتقبة أنجزه استباقا ثلة من العسكريين الليبيين. يتعلق الأمر بتعيين قائد لما سيعرف لاحقا بالجيش الوطني الليبي، الذي يكثر الحديث هذه الأيام عن إعادة تشكيله وتفعيله. ففي مدينة البيضاء شرقي البلاد ومن جانب واحد توافق نحو 150 من الضباط وضباط الصف على تسمية الجنرال خليفة حفتر رئيسا لأركان الجيش.
كان حفتر يتطلع للعب دور قيادي إبان سقوط القذافي، لكن دعم 150 ضابطا لتوليه قيادة الجيش الليبي لم تكن كافية. وفي 14 من فبراير 2014 خرج الرجل ليعلن ما سماها خريطة الطريق تبدأ بتعليق عمل الحكومة، إعلان تبعه موقف مماثل من كتيبتي الصواعق والقعقاع. جاء الرد سريعا من السلطات الانتقالية التي دعت لاعتقال حفتر وحل الكتيبتين. بعد أقل من 3 أشهر عاد الثلاثي ليعلن حل المؤتمر الوطني، لكن على الميدان هذه المرة لا على شاشات القنوات.